welcome back. It's been so long since I've seen you, like a whopping 30 seconds. So I was going to try and do all of these things in one recorded lecture, but it didn't work out, so here we are, and we have moved on to chapter 6, which is about learning. Listen to me right now, okay? There is one big, huge lesson that I need you to take from this chapter, okay? And that is the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning, okay? Classical conditioning happens as a result of repeated pairings. We're going to talk about Pavlov's dogs here in a second. And for some of you that have dogs, you may already know this. The minute they hear that door open and their food kind of jingle around, they know what time it is. And that's because so many times you take the food out and they hear it and they know that you're about to pour it in the bowl. Because those things happen constantly, they know what to expect. Again, that's the repeated pairings of it. With operant conditioning happens or occurs as a result of the consequences after something happens. You're like, Ross, what are you talking about? So, you stole a piece of bubble gum from the convenience store as a 5-year-old. I don't know. I'm being creative here. Normally, what would happen is that there would be what we call a punishment of some sort. Punishment tries to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. Now, that may include adding something painful, like a spanking, or it could be taking away privileges. Okay? Because something happens after you steal that gum that you don't like, it's going to make you less likely to steal the gum. Versus whenever you learn something new, maybe you play a solo at a flute recital or something, I don't know, maybe you're a member of the band and you get a solo. Whenever you're done, people applaud you, people say good job, your parents are probably like, I'm so proud of you, maybe they bring you flowers, I don't know. But because of that, because of what happens after you perform this thing, it's going to change how often you're going to do those things again. If it's something good, that's going to be a reinforcer. It's going to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again, versus a punishment, which is going to decrease the likelihood of the behavior. 2 minutes in, one lesson, probably talked way too much. But it's important, and like I said, if there's one thing that you get from this chapter, that's what I need you to get, is the difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning, okay? So learning, systematic, relatively enduring change in behavior that results from experiences. A theory of learning that focuses solely on observable behaviors. Hopefully this is sounding familiar to you, because this is behaviorism, which we've already talked about. You don't care about feelings, you don't care about thought processes, all you're looking at is the behavior. And that's the behavioral perspective, or behaviorism. Associative learning, when an organism makes a connection or an observation between two events. And then observational learning. If you have ever gotten a new job, you've probably been privy to observational learning. That weird kind of trial period where you don't even touch a cash register or whatever it is that you do, that you simply watch and observe other people and see how they handle certain situations. That's all part of observational learning. That's Albert Bandura, and it tends to be very effective. Moving on though, talking about classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs. So Ivan Pavlov had some dogs. And you notice anytime they were around food or meat powder that they drooled, they salivated. But why? Because food is what we call an unconditioned stimulus. Nobody had to teach the dogs that they liked food. They just knew it because they could smell it and yum. It's an instinct, okay? It's also an unconditioned stimulus. Now, what he did was he took that unconditioned stimulus and he took that food or that meat powder, depending on who you ask, and he paired it with something that had no effect on the dogs, which was a bell. He would ring this bell, and these dogs would look at him like he was stupid. But eventually, he started ringing that bell and giving them food, and then they're like, oh, I like this bell. Anytime he rings this bell, I get food now. I like that. So eventually, they would hear the bell automatically associate it with food because, again, associative learning, associate it with food, and they would drool or salivate. Sometimes, after a while, he kept pairing these two things together. After a while, what was a neutral stimulus, that bell that they once cared absolutely nothing about, it is now a conditioned stimulus. Because that bell makes these dogs drool. Why? Because it had been paired with food so many times. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense, because that's how this works. So if you go to slide number 4, slide number 4 is going to be your friend, because I'm going to ask you, what is an unconditioned stimulus? What is an unconditioned response? What is a conditioned stimulus? What is a conditioned response? Remember this, okay? Unconditioned means unlearned. Nobody had to teach you that you liked food. Nobody had to teach you that, if somebody is, hovering over you with their hand back this way, to kind of flinch, to run away, because it seems like a threatening thing. So you have an unconditioned response. You run away. Just like whenever you go out to eat and your friend gets their food before you do and you're really hungry, your mouth starts to water because you're hungry. And that is an unconditioned response. Your conditioned stimulus is that bell. It was once a neutral stimulus, but eventually it takes on a life of its own because it's been paired so many times. And then a conditioned response is what happens as a result of those things. Acquisition is when that connection, that association is forged between the unconditioned stimulus and it's kind of becoming a conditioned stimulus. So the minute that bell stopped being a neutral stimulus for those dogs, it was a conditioned stimulus, and it evoked a conditioned response, which was drooling or salivating, because it had been paired with food so many times. Hopefully that helps you out. Kind of depending on if you're a verbal person or if you're a picture person, a visual person, slides 4 and 5 kind of explain the same thing. One is words though, and one is pictures. So hopefully that helps. Going along with that, in the book that kind of gets us up to 184-ish. Gonna talk really quick about generalization and discrimination. So, say for example that Pavlov's bell broke and he had to get a different bell, and maybe this one's a higher tone. Okay? If that bell still evokes the same reaction, then that's generalization. They know it's a chime, it's a bell, and even though those sounds are not exactly the same, if they produce the same reaction, that's generalization. Now, say for example that you have multiple bells, and you fix the original bell and that one's still associated with food, you take that higher pitched bell and you ring it whenever it's playtime and you let them out of their cages. That can be discrimination because they know one lower pitched bell or one lower toned bell means food time, and that the higher pitched bell means fun time or playtime. And that is discrimination. So they're similar, but they produce kind of different reactions. Extinction, whenever those things stop being paired. Say Pavlov's just being a real jerk and decides after a while, you know what, I'm not going to feed these dogs whenever I ring this bell. I'm just going to ring this bell whenever I feel like it. Eventually, they're going to stop associating that bell with food. And extinction occurs, and that's where that behavior stops occurring, even though the neutral stimulus, because it's neutral again, they don't associate it with food anymore. That association has died off. So hopefully that makes some sense. It talks about spontaneous recovery. Sometimes, every once in a while, people will fall back into their old ways, and the dogs may hear the bell, and whether or not there's food, they may spontaneously salivate. Because at one time, that connection was forged. And every once in a while, even after it hasn't been reinforced for a while, they'll still kind of remember that connection. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm not going to ask about renewal. Also not going to ask about counter conditioning. Aversive conditioning. So, let's say that you have a friend, because this is not something that you would ever do. But let's say you have a friend that goes out drinking and they drink way too much. Insert drink of choice here. We'll just go generic and say beer. That your friend has too much beer, drinks too much, and throws up. That is going to be, that it has the potential to be an aversive conditioning situation. Because every time that they smell beer, it's going to remind them of that time that they threw it up, and it's going to be gross. Same thing with food poisoning. So I have a friend who ate Moe's. I actually ate Moe's with them. I was fine. He was not. And to this day, he still will not eat Moe's because it made him deathly ill. That is aversive conditioning. You have a very unpleasant stimulus or a very unpleasant reaction to something. And that connection of that stimulus to that sickness creates the urge to avoid it, or aversion. So hopefully that makes sense. This chapter also talks a little bit about placebo effect, which we kind of talked about with chapter 2. So whether people are actually getting better, or if they just think that they're getting better because they're engaging in something, who knows. It talks about classical conditioning and advertising and drug habituation. Here's my challenge to you. I want you to think of a song that talks about alcohol or talks about drugs. More specifically, alcohol. A lot of times people associate those things, and then, a little while later will be like, oh, I really want one of these. Well, it's because they've heard it. So, something to kind of keep in mind. Habituation, decreased responsiveness to a stimulus after repeated presentations. So we kind of talked about this with tolerance in the last chapter, which was all of 5 minutes ago. I don't know. Okay, at least 12 now, but whatever. Your body gets used to it. So just like if your body gets used to you running 5 miles every day, it makes it easier. If you do something bad, like soda or drugs, your body gets used to that. And it has a less potent reaction than it would have if it were a new kind of novel thing. Talking about Little Albert. It's a conditioned emotional response. Little Albert was 11 months old, and for kids of that age, they're not really scared of a whole lot, but one thing that does scare them is loud noises. And what they did was they introduced him to a white rat, and then they generated a loud noise. And he eventually came to associate those two things together so much that he became scared of the rat. Legend says, urban myth, urban legend, whatever you want to call it, said that fear generalized into fuzzy white blankets and even Santa Claus because, white, hairy, furry, fuzzy things kind of became a scary thing for him. Whether or not that's true, I can't tell you. I wasn't around, wasn't born then, but I was taught that yes, that happened. But here's the thing, guys. Emotional memories are your strongest, and that's why conditioned emotional responses are so strong. So something to keep in mind with that. Moving on to operant conditioning. All right. I need you to take everything that I've taught you about this and put it kind of on a shelf somewhere. I need to break something down for you really quick. Reinforcers increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring. Point blank, period. It doesn't matter if you add something or take something away. That doesn't matter at this point. Reinforcer, means against, or again. Enforce means to make something happen. You are trying to make something happen again. You're trying to increase that likelihood of behavior. Now, you can do this in a couple ways. You can either add something good, like maybe a candy. And like in the video with the Big Bang Theory that I think I put in this Lecture. Sheldon gives Penny a chocolate every time she does something that he wants. That is positive reinforcement. You are giving them something good to increase the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. Now, with that being said, you can also increase the likelihood of something happening again by taking something away. For example, maybe kid gets all A's on a report card. So, mom takes away a chore. Like, cool, I don't have to take out the trash anymore because I got straight A's. Awesome. You're still trying to increase the likelihood of that behavior, but instead of giving them something, you are taking something that they don't like away. Reinforcers, you are simply trying to make something happen again. You are increasing the likelihood of it happening again. And whether you add something or take something away is what's going to dictate whether it's positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Okay? Now, moving on to punishment. Punishment, you decrease the likelihood of a behavior. You want to stop it. So, speeding. Whenever you speed on the interstate or on a street, whatever, you get a ticket. Okay? That is a citation. That is adding something that you don't like. Because any day you get a ticket is a bad thing, right? You are adding something negative. Okay? Now, you can also take something away, like privileges. My son, whenever he was not doing well in school, we took away his video games. We took away something that he liked as punishment for not studying enough. Again, you are trying to keep something from happening. Okay? Now, you can think this into oblivion. Because, think about jail time. You are adding something aversive, but you are also taking away freedoms. Do you see how this can get really confusing really quick? That's why I'm telling you, don't do that to yourself. Not for the sake of this class. Don't do it. Just remember, reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behavior, and punishment decreases it. Tracking? Yes? No? I know you're not going to answer me, but hopefully that gave you time to let that sink in, and hopefully that makes sense. All right, so carrying on, going back to operant conditioning. Again, classical conditioning focuses on repeated pairing. Operant conditioning focuses on consequences. Okay? Thorndike's law of effect. Thorndike's law of effect says that if something is good or if somebody likes something, that will continually happen. Okay? So, stating that behaviors are more likely to be repeated when followed by pleasurable outcomes and less likely when followed by unpleasant outcomes. It's pretty much how this whole thing works. Okay? Reinforcers. Again, you increase the likelihood of something occurring. With punishments, not as much. Shaping. Use of reinforcers to guide behavior to the acquisition of desired complex behavior. Rome was not built in a day. So whenever you are trying to teach people something, you encourage them every little step of the way. You don't get mad whenever they don't get it at the first try. For example, potty training. Okay? Anytime a child mentions having to go potty or goes to the toilet, something like that, you encourage that behavior. Maybe giving them a piece of candy or giving them praise or applause, whatever. They're still going to have accidents, but the closer they get to where you want them to be, the more you encourage them. And that's shaping. Successive approximations, a method of shaping that uses reinforcers to condition a series of small steps that gradually approach the target behavior. So again, potty training. Maybe kids are still using diapers, but maybe they start tugging on it whenever they have to use the restroom or whenever it's dirty. You're going to encourage that. You're going to reinforce that. Successive approximation. For me, I had a rat whenever I was in conditioning and learning class, and it was in a Skinner box. So basically, it was a glass box, and on one wall was a lever. Whenever we got that rat, the closer that it got to that lever, the more Fruity Pebbles we gave it. Whenever the rat actually hit the lever, it was like jackpot. All the Fruity Pebbles. Your goal is to get them to learn to press that lever. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I did include the video from Big Bang Theory. It is on the slide called Positive Reinforcement. It is on slide 9 of 13. And again, he's just giving her a chocolate every time that she does what he wants. Now, primary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are things that you need in order to survive. Okay? Food, sleep, things like that. You're like, Dross, how do you condition someone with sleep? Well, watch like a federal interrogation or something. Watch like Homeland, something like that. One of the things they'll do is keep people awake. And then whenever they get the information they want, they let them sleep. Primary reinforcer is innately satisfying. It does not require any learning. So very similar to an unconditioned stimulus in that way. And it meets a biological need. Secondary reinforcers do not satisfy a biological need, but it often gains their power because it allows you to procure primary reinforcers. Biggest secondary reinforcer? Money. Because you can buy almost anything that you need with money. While you are not innately meeting a biological need, it is the means by which you can buy the things that you need. So hopefully that makes sense. Continuous reinforcement, a schedule of reinforcement in which every target behavior is reinforced. I'm not going to go real deep with that, guys, so don't worry about that too much. Discrimination and generalization, we talked about that already. Also kind of talked about extinction and spontaneous recovery. And then punishment. Application of a consequence that decreases the likelihood of a behavior occurring, either by adding something unpleasant or removing something good away. And then, Bandura, observational learning. So there's a video, and what it is there is a kid, this is called the Bobo doll experiment. Kid sees adults playing with this Bobo doll, and it's this inflatable thing that you can try and knock down 1,000,000 times, but it always pops itself back up. It's in the video, you'll see what I'm talking about. But observational learning. The kid sees the adult picking this Bobo doll up, throwing it around, smacking it, yelling at it, being mean to it. And then the child was given a choice. Hey, go in this playroom, play with the toy. What they saw is that the kids who saw the adults treat the Bobo doll that way treated the Bobo doll the same way. They got in, they started beating it up, they were mean to it. So does this mean that the reason that we're mean to people is because we see other people be mean to others? No, not necessarily. But what it does is it shows that the more you observe these things, the more likely you are to replicate those observations. That was Bandura and the Bobo doll study. Looking at chapter 6, it does go really big into the schedules of reinforcement. I'm not going to go that deep. I'm telling you right now. Applied behavior analysis. I'm kind of backtracking at this point. I'm on page 199. Behavior modification is a big deal. For all of my people that are looking to do education, this is huge because this is what education is based off of. Okay? Using operant conditioning, so encouraging someone when they do well, or punishing someone whenever they do something wrong, taking away privileges, things like that. Those are all behavior modification techniques. And I'm telling you right now, for anyone who is in education, for any of my parents out there, I know I have some of you guys out there, feel free to share about what you did to modify your children's behavior, to get them to behave the way that they needed to. By all means, feel free to share those things. Because I have to do it all the time. I do it all the time with my son. Oh, hey, good job. Here's $5. Please continue to take out the trash. Thank you. Versus, dude, a D is not going to fly. I'm sorry. Give me the Xbox. You're done. We shape the desired behavior by what we allow them to have and do and play with. So hopefully that helps. Page 205 talks about biological constraints, instinctive drift, preparedness. Not going to be going that deep with it, guys. really, the biggest thing that I want you to focus on with this, again, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, punishment, reinforcers, and observational learning. Those are going to be the biggest things that I am going to look for in this chapter. So hopefully that helps. If you have questions, let me know. But yeah, that should do it.